Let me get my screen share going here. Let's see. Okay, yeah, this is gonna. I think we're gonna kind of do two parts of this. So first, I'm gonna just kind of give you the spiel. I'm gonna give you the Atlas Obscura spiel. Why it exists, sort of what it is, in its kind of biggest picture, and then at the end, I think I want to make sure there's plenty of time to ask questions, not just about Atlas, but about kind of the media landscape. Like I've been running a digital media company for 15 years. That means it's like I feel like a Rip Van Winkle of the internet. You know what I mean? It's just like, oh, I remember when. So I'd love to also just kind of answer any Atlas questions and talk about Atlas and how it functions as a business and as a media company, and then happy to talk like bigger frame, like what the future of media is. It's all speculative, but I have some strong opinions about what I think is going to work and is working, and how the landscape's going to change. But first, I'll give you the spiel. So Josh, thanks for having me. It's exciting to talk to you all. The talk itself is also sort of in two pieces. Like one is like very comfortable, familiar territory. The second is like a big thesis and idea around travel, how travel has changed, and specifically about how travel media needs to change to accommodate kind of what the future of travel looks like. But I'll start kind of with myself and my background and how I started doing all of this. So I feel like I've sort of had this core belief for really my whole, as long as I can remember, of this kind of sense of there being a kind of a secret layer. Like it's almost a quasi spiritual sense, and it's been a very like important guiding principle in my life. But just this sense that if I could kind of know a little more, or like understood a little more, I would be able to find this kind of like hidden layer all around us. And I think it started in a number of ways, this kind of this sense of the hidden layer of the world. I grew up here in the Midwest. It didn't look exactly like this. I mostly lived in Minneapolis, but this is the environment I grew up in, and it meant that when my parents and I were going on vacations, um, we were taking big road trips, and so that's I didn't take an international flight until I was a teenager. I took my first like big trip. So these were all my trips with my parents as a kid. We drove to North Dakota, South Dakota, and on one of these trips we went to a place that I still cite as the like Atlas Obscura place, the like true, the gem around which all of this stuff has accumulated. And that's a place called the House on the Rock. Some of you may know it. It's got a great like legend behind it. The legend is that there was an architect who wanted to work for Frank Lloyd Wright and went to show Frank Lloyd Wright his designs because Frank Lloyd Wright was working in Wisconsin on Taliesin. And Frank Lloyd Wright said, I wouldn't hire you to build a cheese crate or a chicken coop. And this guy, Alex Jordan Jr., was, stormed off, angry, insulted, and decided to build this kind of wild, crazy Frank Lloyd Wrong. And that's what he did. He built this crazy, incredible house, and he just started adding to it more and more over the years. In fact, this like legend is basically bullshit. But the really interesting thing is that House on the Rock was basically Meow Wolf before Meow Wolf. It was this group of artists just creating stuff out of whole cloth, out of their imagination, and cramming it all into one immersive space. So in the House on the Rock is the world's largest carousel with the world's most diverse set of carousel animals, largest indoor carousel, I should say. It's got this infinity hall that looks like it goes on forever. And it's got a sculpture of a squid fighting a whale the size of the Statue of Liberty, all inside one sprawling house that takes like 5 hours to walk through. And I just remember being 12, which is about when I saw this, and thinking, if this is what's in the woods of Wisconsin, like what else is there to be found? And I think that framework, this desire to go seeking, really stuck with me. Like I said, I grew up in mostly in Minneapolis. This is me as a teenager. I think I pictured myself as the like cool punk kid in the Polaroid. I definitely looked like the kid in the beanie. I mean, I still do basically. But in Minneapolis, as I got older, I sort of channeled this energy. I was a straight edger. I didn't drink. I didn't do drugs, but I still had a real energy to get into trouble. So I channeled this energy into graffiti and urban exploration. And that is how I spent my teenage years in Minneapolis. So I would, 15 years old, I would go out in the dead of the night, ride my bike across the empty city, go, climb around in some abandoned building or find some bridge underpass. And as a teenager, this was just, it was thrilling, it was romantic, and it really did give me this reason to explore the nooks and crannies of Minneapolis. And it just exposed me to kind of a vision of the city that I think most people never get. This is a place called Gold Medal Flour. It's an old flour mill. It was the biggest like flour mill on the Mississippi for a while. And it was abandoned for many decades by the time I was exploring it. And it became this giant kind of artistic gallery of graffiti. So people would just go there and paint for hours. I loved going to this space and sneaking around. It's now actually like part of it's still abandoned. Part of it is condos, and it now has an incredible museum in it called the Mill City Museum, which is about its history as a flour mill, the many flour explosions that happened there, which is part of why it was abandoned when I was sneaking around in it. But this all kind of fed into this notion of looking for that hidden world. And ultimately, this led me, post college to meeting my co-founder Josh and starting Atlas Obscura. So, our core mission is to give people this sense of wonder and curiosity in the world. And it's that sense of wonder I think you naturally have as a kid. And it's the sense of delight and discovery you get when you stumble across something amazing and unexpected on a trip, that kind of feeling of true serendipity. And so, we started by sort of asking people to tell us all the places that they thought belonged in Atlas Obscura. So as this is like an old line now, but Eiffel Tower is not an Atlas Obscura place, but the tiny secret apartment at the top of the Eiffel Tower where Gustav Eiffel would host people like Thomas Edison, and they would like sip tea and play phonograph records. Like that is an Atlas Obscura place because most people don't know that it's there, sort of hidden in plain sight. This is the everlasting lightning storm in Venezuela. I took a trip here with my co-founder Josh many years ago now. And it's a place that gets more lightning than almost anywhere else on the planet. So much so that actually it's been recorded since the 1500s. And some attempts to raid this coast of Venezuela were foiled by these lightning storms because you could see the ships approaching. It's something like this, which I stumbled on a trip in Florence. I was at one of the big history of science museums. They've since renamed themselves. But when I was here, this was the History of Science Museum in Florence. And mostly it's like giant armillary spheres and huge pieces of scientific equipment and telescopes. And there was this one tiny human fragment in the museum, this little finger, this wizened, mummified finger in this little glass dome. And as I leaned in to look at the placard, turns out that this is Galileo's middle finger. And it was basically snapped off. He was long dead when it was taken from his body. He'd been dead 100 years, but it was taken by an acolyte, a fan of his, kind of passed around, and then ended up in this museum. And the joke is always kind of like, Galileo, he was actually a believer. He was not really a heretic. He believed, he was a religious man in his own way. So the question whether this is pointing up towards the heavens or aimed towards Rome is kind of the joke of the middle finger of Galileo. They've since renamed the museum the Galileo Museum. It's a great, incredible museum. And then, places like this is Raw Paulette's Caves in New Mexico. He's an artist who hand carves these incredible sandstone caves throughout the Southwest. The Cat Island of Japan, a place with many hundreds of cats, many more cats than people, and has become a kind of must-see tourist destination for cat lovers in Japan. So these are the kinds of places that started to create the Atlas Obscura. And still, this is kind of at the core. We have about 30,000 places submitted by our users, and people come to plan their trips and daydream a little bit and just explore the world in a new way. We're going to slip now into like, you're going to be able to tell by the slides. We're slipping now into like brand presentation slides from like a different deck. They're like a little slicker. They're like a little more, whatever, targeted touch points you see. But over the years, we've expanded kind of from that database into a big email list, a podcast, social. We have a native app. We run trips, we do books, and we've managed to sort of grow this in a bunch of meaningful ways by kind of creating content that we feel really strongly about, that we feel really tells stories of place in a big meaningful way. I'm just gonna cruise through these. One thing that's interesting, and I think it's hard to tell from the outside, is the travel media space it's like a little anemic, to be honest. There's like not a lot of great stuff happening in it. And at this point, we are the third largest travel media organization out there. We are only surpassed. We're bigger than Nat Geo in terms of web traffic. We're passed by CNN Travel and Travel and Leisure. And then in terms of time on site, we're only second to Nat Geo, which is like fine. I'm very happy to be in second place to Nat Geo as far as engagement. And so we've, it's been a 15-year project of like growing this thing from what is essentially started as this map of places into all the different ways we could bring this like core mission to folks. And we also tried to expand beyond the digital platform into much more kind of physical and experiential stuff. So we grew into books in a big way in 2016. This was the first book. I since made a kid's book, the first kid's book. I'm working on our second right now. I have to say, once you've talked in front of a group of like 400 seventh graders, like no audience will frighten you again. That is the most intimidating group of people you can ever speak in front of. There's something about seventh grade. It's like not sixth graders, not eighth graders, it's seventh graders. Anyway, and we just had a new book come out called Wildlife, which is all about the natural world. And we've also grown a big way into experiential. So we started doing these real life events. This is a sleepover that we had at the Explorers Club. Is it a video? Yeah, it's a video. And like that was super fun. It was a chance to like explore their collection, talk about their history, and also just like for adults to have like a cool weird sleepover. This is a trip we took people to the Times Square Ball and the Wizard of Times Square. There's like one guy who runs the New Year's Eve ball drop. He's been doing it for 20 years. He controls like the literal lever. Anyway, he like dropped the ball, showed it to our folks, and we got to learn about the whole thing. We brought an ambassador wolf to a bar in Brooklyn. These are the kind of like experiential stuff that we got into, and then that eventually expanded into trips. So this is our first trip that we ran, a group trip of about 14 people to Bulgaria in winter to see basically these abandoned communist monuments. And it was like a trip that just like no one was offering that trip, but we had the very strong intuition that if we could put it together, there'd be a group of people who were really interested. And they were. We sold that trip out really quickly because I think there's a lot of architecture folks and photographers who were very excited to go and see these places. This is the inside of the Buzludza monument. And we've since expanded a bunch of stuff. We have a Death Valley trip to kind of do dark sky photography. This is a trip we ran to Romania. So basically an amusement park in a salt mine called Salina Turda. We run trips to Mexico to see the big butterfly migration, where basically all the monarchs return to this one area in Mexico. We don't run these anymore. We can't for obvious reasons, but we ran trips to Chernobyl, to Pripyat, and to see basically, what remains, and also to experience what is basically this now in kind of incredible nature conservancy. It's become this place where animal life has just really thrived over the last 10 years. So these are from those. There's a trip to the Amazon, which is focused on kind of science and making new friends of all sorts. This is a whiptail scorpion spider, and the group goes out and counts. They go out with scientists in the middle of the night and basically do a species count to just sort of track, is the species doing well? Is it declining? And not everybody wants to do this, but for like some of our travelers, this is like truly the best part of the entire trip, is hanging out with one of these whiptail scorpion creatures, and they can't bite, they don't hurt you. Anyway, so we've been running trips and telling people about, places like the gates of hell in Turkmenistan, this just giant burning hole in the middle of the desert created by an industrial accident. But I think as we've done all this work, it's started to fit into. I didn't go into this work sort of from the sense of like I want to learn a lot about the travel industry, but I've ended up learning a lot about the travel industry, the media industry too, and where those things intersect. And I think I didn't understand when I started this project just how big and meaningful the travel industry actually is in the world. It generates 10% of global economic activity. Like it's bigger than steel making. It's bigger than plastics. It's bigger than steel making and plastics put together like twice over. It's a giant. It's 1 in 5 new jobs in the world was related in some way to the tourism economy. It's growing faster than the global economy like year after year. And obviously there's a dip in COVID, but it's come back right back on that track. And and so travel is changing the world in lots of ways that are both good and not as good. Uh, this is like, so this is a example like this is Trolltunga in Norway. And occasionally you'll see this beautiful image on one brave soul has ventured out to the edge of this cliff to have a moment of solitude in nature. But then you kind of look closer and all of these photos are kind of, there's a lot of them and they look exactly the same. And that's because this is what it actually looks like when you go there. There's a line of people waiting to take that Instagram photo. And, this is one of the sort of hard dynamics of travel, which is as something becomes popular or something is discovered, it immediately has this kind of dogpile effect. So like in our heads, we might see Barcelona or Dubrovnik, Croatia, or like Venice like this, these romantic, beautiful places. But in reality, this is Venice in the high season. They get 60,000 visitors every day, and Venice has 55,000 total residents. This is in Dubrovnik. It takes about an hour to walk through a 300-meter long pedestrian zone, and this is Barcelona, where they are basically like done with tourism. This is a sign that they hung up a couple of years ago, which I think, why call it tourist season if we can't shoot them? Like, fair question. And this isn't going to go away. Like, this is international tourist arrivals by world region. In 1960, 25 million people traveled internationally. It's a tiny number. It was a billion in 2013. It'll be 2 billion in 2030. These numbers are just going to keep going up. This is a fun graph. So this is, why is this happening? This is basically outbound travelers over many, many years. And you can just watch like the Chinese middle class just like emerging enormously in their international travel. Now, that's a little less true now, but fundamentally the dynamics of a middle class China and a middle class India are going to keep, these numbers are going to keep growing. International travel is going to keep going up. And, and this problem kind of over tourism at the city, state, country level, it's becoming a bigger and bigger part of the kind of travel landscape, and solving it is becoming a bigger focus for every country. They want tourism. Tourism is such a valuable piece of the economy for so many places, but it's creating a lot of tension between tourists and locals, and some places are putting in tourist taxes, and so this just remains this kind of unsolved problem in a lot of ways. And part of this is the dynamics of travel media, both historically and currently, which is like people find some place, and are like, wow, Portugal's great. And someone writes an essay, and then the next 50 glossy spreads forever are about, going to Portugal. By the time that most people arrive there, it's not a very good experience for the place or the traveler. And this is just, it's a dynamic that's hard to shift. There are structural aspects that start to create this snowballing effect. It reminds me actually a ton of this phenomenon that I am perennially fascinated with, which is baby names. Like this same dynamics happen in baby names, right? You maybe have seen this graph. So this is the graph of baby names over time. So like, there's no committee deciding that Jennifer is going to be the most popular name across the country for many years, but like that's just what happens. And then suddenly, like you end up with these same things. You end up with places that just suddenly like, Barcelona is a Jennifer, Portugal is a Jennifer. They just become completely uh underwater in terms of the amount of travelers trying to get there. So, you know, the over tourism has a lot of impacts. It has some impacts on kind of locals' experience that can be bad. Obviously, it also has some kind of other problems, like there's kind of climate and environmental impacts that come along with this. So like, you know, I love travel. This is my world. This is the thing I do. I think it's genuinely like a fundamental good in most ways for the world. So you know, what is the solution to this problem? How do you deal with this kind of issue of travel creating these dogpiling effects that then start to take away all the good of that experience, both for the traveler and for the place hosting the traveler? In the pandemic, we got to kind of experience what it looked like to just stay home. But I also think like there are other ways to do this, and there's like interesting examples to start to look at about how you address this. So the impacts of tourism are just, they're really complex to weigh. In any given place, there are a lot of complex things happening. So like one example is that tourism has negative effects on environment, but the tourists are also much, much more likely to give to um, like the World Wildlife Fund or other regenerative nonprofits. Um, and and there's also the fact that sometimes tourism in a given place is replacing an existing extractive industry. So this is a place called Kawa Ijen, and it's a sulfur mine which is undergoing this really interesting transition from being a sulfur mine, this like pretty high impact extractive industry where it is in Indonesia, to a full-time tourist destination, because at night it looks like this. The sulfur gases, and they're non-greenhouse gases, by the way. They're like anti-greenhouse gases in a way. These don't get up to the high atmosphere. I don't know. We don't, whatever. That's a side road. Anyway, they spontaneously combust into these blue flames, and it's just this incredible sight. And so now the local economy around this mine is kind of re-engineering itself to see if this can become kind of a successful travel industry. And some of the miners are now becoming guides, and frankly, it's a better gig. Like being a sulfur miner is a very hard gig. Being a tour guide at a sulfur mine where you're just like taking people to come and see this thing is like kind of a better job for most of the people there. And then there's this question of like not just how do we avoid it from being extractive, how do we make it additive? How do we make a tourism media environment that is better at reacting to this, at basically steering people towards places that need tourism and away from places that are just being crushed by it? And how do we sometimes say like, don't go, in the words of this guy. Sometimes you just like, there are places where you are going to have a bad experience. Venice during high season, like I wouldn't recommend it. It's just not a great time. It's very hot and very busy, and everybody's grouchy with you. So, there's a huge power in tourism, and the question of how you aim that power is something I spend a lot of time thinking about it. And I definitely don't have all the answers, but I think I've seen one answer, one bright spot that really started to make this make sense for me was in a place called the Clown Motel. And the Clown Motel is it's a roadside motel in Tonopah, Nevada. And it was around for a long time and no one paid much attention to it. But then the internet caught wind of it. We caught wind of it. We ended up writing a story about it. And it's become this kind of mecca for travelers. People going to Vegas will drive the 4 hours out to Tonopah and stay the night, and they'll go get a drink at the little town. And this has been a really big boon to the local economy. And the thing that I think we saw at Atlas Obscura so clearly was that, well, this issue of over tourism is incredibly in your face. It is very obvious. You can really tell when a place is being hammered by too much tourism and tourism attention. The other side of this story is much quieter. So we at Atlas see all of these places that are just amazing and are absolutely struggling to survive. So this is a place called Kovacs Planetarium in Wisconsin, and it's in Rhinelander. And this guy, Frank Kovac, built it from scratch. It's a 22-foot diameter, 2-ton planetarium globe, and he painted every star, there are 5,000 plus stars, with glow-in-the-dark paint, and they're in the correct position. It's the correct planetarium. And this is this guy's like single-handed project that he made. But he couldn't get enough people to come and see it because he just couldn't, get in front of enough travelers to know that it existed. And he closed the planetarium and went back to work in the machine shop. He's actually been able to since very happily go back and reopen it, which is like really nice. This is a place in Wyoming called Smith's Mansion. It was created by an artist who died building it, and his daughter is running it. But it's hard to support these weird outsider art projects, and it's since been sold off, and I'm not sure what its fate is going to end up being. And this is a place called Margaret's Grocery. This is Margaret and her husband Dennis. Margaret's first husband was killed in a robbery in 1970. And 5 years later, she met Reverend Dennis, and he told her that if she married him, he would build her a castle. And he was true to his word. He built this incredible Margaret's Grocery in Mississippi, this like folk art castle. And slowly over a decade plus, he was a bricklayer, so he knew how to do some of this stuff, and he built it into his kind of folk art version of heaven. And it's a beautiful singular location in Mississippi. But when they both passed away, there was no one to help take it over. And very few people knew about it or knew that it was like this incredible place they could go visit. And so it's fallen into a real state of ruin. There's a local artist there now who's trying to maintain it, but it may be a little bit beyond saving at this point. So, we just saw that on the one hand, there's this, huge problem of over tourism. And on the other hand, you have these wondrous places disappearing, and that there's like a real solution in there. And the place that is the most powerful example of this for me is this place. These are the root bridges in Cherrapunji, India. This is one of the wettest places in the world. You get more rain here than almost anywhere else. And 3 months into starting Atlas Obscura, so this is like the fall of 2009, we got a submission to the site. And it was a guy who said basically, listen, I run a small bed and breakfast in Cherrapunji, India. And there are these things here that are absolutely incredible, but nobody knows about them, and they're going to disappear. And went on to describe these living root bridges of Cherrapunji, India. And so these bridges are not constructed in any sort of normal fashion. They are grown from the roots of 2 Ficus elastica trees. So the roots are slowly grafted together over about 15 years, and they create these incredible strong bridges. And the reason this is done is actually because it's so wet here. Normal infrastructure just is washed away or rots away. But these things just get stronger and stronger. So these are almost certainly hundreds of years old. We believe they think that these are at least 500 years old, maybe older, that the practice goes back that far. But the reason they were disappearing is because there was absolutely zero tourism industry about them. Zero. To living root bridges. Like, this is genuinely something out of, the Lord of the Rings. And no one knew about them, and no one was going to them. And people were draining the trees for their latex, basically. So, and things were getting cut down to grow palm oil and other things. So, we started sort of talking about things. At the time we published the first piece about these, there was nothing on the internet about them. They've since I'm very, very happy to say that at this point, there is now a sustainable tourism industry built around them. There is a nonprofit organization set up to preserve them and grow new ones and teach members of the Khasi tribe, who are the people who grow these bridges and live in this part of India, um, the process of growing new bridges. And the Indian government is looking into basically setting up a kind of national park or national trail around these bridges. And so they now have this kind of reason to exist and economic existence in the world. The same is true of this place in Peru. This is the Quechua, sometimes known as the Last Incan Bridge. It's a bridge woven entirely out of grass. It's remade every year. They cut it down. These are my little feeties from like 2010 walking across this. Every year they cut it down. The four towns come together. They weave a new bridge. And it's also like an unbroken piece of the Incan Empire. This is made exactly today as it was during the Incan Empire when this was part of this vast Incan road system. Or places like this is Bazludza. That's this Bulgarian communist monument that was the seat of communist power in Bulgaria. But then when communism fell, totally abandoned, fell very far into ruin, and was really in danger of basically like crumbling into the hillside. But there's been enough kind of awareness brought to it over the last 10 years that UNESCO now recognizes it. It's like being stabilized and will be able to be saved as this kind of important piece of architectural heritage. So, and then finally, sometimes like, there are places like North Carolina, which was just walloped by the hurricane and the flooding. But a lot of places, when they suffer a major natural disaster calamity, they then immediately suffer this second economic disaster, because there are certainly parts of North Carolina which are still in no position to host tourists. But there are huge parts of the state that desperately still need tourism dollars. And this is true of Puerto Rico after a hurricane, or most places. And, there isn't many good mechanisms to help people understand, like, how do I go visit this place in a responsible way that brings tourism dollars, that actually supports the recovery, rather than kind of compounding this natural disaster with a travel related economic disaster. So, this is kind of the life's work of me and Atlas Obscura. We are constantly trying to improve our sustainability. We do big 110% carbon offsetting. We can, whatever, you can argue about carbon offsetting, but we contribute 10% to field research and conservation efforts of all of our trips, and hire local guides on every trip. And so, our reason to exist is both because I really love weird, crazy places like the Clown Motel, but also because I think functionally, it is really important to figure out how to tell new myths around travel, how to create new mythic spaces, so you don't, end up sending everyone to the same goddamn sunflower farm, and just, ending up with a sunflower zombie apocalypse. There are so many places. You don't need to tell another story about Tulum. You can tell a story about the tank graveyard in Eritrea and its relationship to their struggle for liberation, and this kind of fascinating country that people know very little about. That's what we're here to do. We were built to help people find hidden wonders all around them. I didn't know when we started this that this sort of tourism economy and dispersal and the role of travel media in that would become so important to me. But I've become a true believer that it's not just important for travelers. I mean, it really is, because you want to have a great travel experience and have a sense of discovery, and not just being hemmed in by a million other tourists, but also just to the future of travel itself. That we have to figure out a way to do this in a way that truly is better for both every traveler and every place. And yeah, and I think I'll stop there. All right, I'm going to stop. That's my spiel.
All right.
And so, yeah. Now, I mean, we can talk about the business. We can talk about travel economy stuff. We can talk about digital media, which is its own big subject matter. So yeah.
All right. Sounds good. Does anyone have any, if you have any questions, let's put it in the chat. Otherwise, I have so many questions.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess one of the I think this is actually, one of the questions Kenzie had mentioned was that a question she's asking herself is like, how can I ethically be a tourist?
Yeah.
And I think that is actually a really interesting, it's sort of an interesting question. Like, tourism, can it be ethical? Like, is it sort of like consumption in general, where it's like you have to consume, but like there's maybe no truly ethical way to be consumptive? How do you think
Look,
about it?
I think there are trade-offs, right? Like any long haul flight is going to have some notable carbon impact, right? Like that's true.
Yeah,
Um, but I also think that like it can be an enormous net positive for you and the world. And it has a lot to do. I mean, I would also say like you don't have to take an international flight to have a great trip, right? There's a ton of kind of local travel and like regional travel you can do. And I think everyone would be shocked at the amount of amazing stuff that is within like 50 or 100 miles of wherever they are. But even if you're going to take an international trip, which like people should, that's like it's an amazing experience to go somewhere new. There's ways you can kind of offset the impacts of the flight. You can do a little. You can stay longer. You can actually pay to offset the impacts of the flight, and then in terms of where you're going, I think that's your biggest impact actually is in terms of choice of what and where you are choosing to go, because there are just places where your impact on the local economy, on the local, um, on the preservation of nature and cultural heritage can be really, really big. And so it's about finding places that are maybe you have to kind of find places in the middle, actually, because if
yeah,
you go to places with zero tourism infrastructure, A, that can be challenging, and B, sometimes it's not set up in quite the right way to accommodate tourists, and so things are kind of being done in some wonky way. I mean, and again, this all comes down to the specifics. If you go to some place that is like mega tourism central, you're probably kind of exacerbating some of the existing kind of impacts from tourism there. But there's just a huge set of places that are like have good infrastructure, enough good infrastructure, are desperate for tourists, and your tourism activity there starts to build incentives and economies that are largely really, really positive. So I think as a net activity, travel is actually often way on the positive side of the ledger. Not always. You can have a you can have a trip
yeah, yeah.
not great, but mostly it's good. And yeah, a lot of it is just about sort of like length of stay, where you're spending your money. Are you going off season or during peak? All this kind of stuff.
All right, love it. Rachel had a question. Rachel, do you want to ask yourself, or do you want me to ask for you?
No, I'm here.
Okay, great.
I will come on camera and everything. I've been wrangling with the dog who desperately wants to get out of
Uh,
the room that she needs to stay in. Um,
Excellent.
I think this is more general. This is not like, Dylan, please answer this question in a definitive way. But something that I'm always interested in, and I think about it from a museum standpoint and also from a travel standpoint, both of which are things and genres that I love very much. Um, but what is the power of ephemerality and the importance of ephemerality? And sort of, I know that some of my most impactful experiences traveling have been seeing things that I know are no longer there, or like, I mean, what I put in the chat is kind of like my big existential musings about this. But I
Mm.
feel like because so many of the Atlas Obscura places are often these kind of like they're further out of the way, or they're kind of intentionally like it's a ghost town, it's not a place people live anymore, or like, it's something kind of that is naturally degrading. Like how do you feel about the power of kind of like letting some of those places degrade, and like whoever gets to see it sees it, and if you don't, you don't.
I feel fine about that. I mean, I think, I am not like a conservationist in that kind of way. Like I think even, and this extends to my feelings about like objects in museums too. I think I understand conservation is important. It has real value. I'm all for conservation. I also think there are ways in which like places are dynamic and they change, and sometimes they disappear, and sometimes that's okay. I don't think they should disappear if they don't if like they have a reason to exist, if a great little museum or art project is closing its doors because it just can't get enough people to basically support itself, that I find very sad. If a ghost town is slowly turning into a pile of dust, that's just kind of lovely. But I, yeah, and I'll say this, there's places we don't put on the Atlas because we think that sending people there would be bad for them. And that's not just obviously very touristy places, but it's also, there's some places that we just think this is actually too fragile, delicate, it's not the kind of thing that's going to benefit. So occasionally, if it makes sense, we'll list something like that without any kind of ability to find it. And that's when it's kind of like, yeah, it's like, okay, but we're going to make it like harder just because it's kind of like, and then sometimes we'll just say we're not putting it on because we don't think it will benefit. So that's like our Hippocratic oath as an organization, but
I love it.
case by case.
Yeah. I think, by the way, I think most organizations should have some version of Hippocratic oath. I think that's a good policy.
Yeah.
Jen Joy had a question. Jen Joy, you want to ask?
No, you can take the question.
Okay. What do you think is the financial viability of using mirroring VR for these unique places? And my mom, and I guess actually I would also just like, let's like talk also, maybe, I mean, VR is like a tactical thing, but like, you guys create a lot of media of places that people are not going to go. So like, what do you think a little bit about a media as a proxy for experience?
Well, I'll say two things. One, just on VR specifically, I'm super pumped because we made a VR app in 2018. And
Nice.
it was made for like the Gear, like the Samsung Gear. It was like very early, and then it kind of fell. We didn't update it for a while. So it's now actually going to be, as of like the 12th, it's going to be back on the Quest store. So you can go and actually like have an Atlas Obscura VR experience to that salt mine in Romania, the crazy amusement park, the Winchester Mystery House, and this kind of eco cult in Italy called Dumb and Her. But so I don't think it's a replacement. I think no media is really a replacement for travel, but I also, there are so many places on the Atlas, and I think this isn't just true for me, it's true for our audience, where like the joy is in learning and reading about it, and you're never gonna go there. Like maybe it's like literally impossible to go there, like the Nika crystals, like deep underground in Mexico. Like you're not going there, but it's awesome to know about and see a picture of. It expands your sense of the world. I don't think it is. I don't think it's actually in competition or even a kind of replacement for travel. I think they're different experiences. I think people like to kind of learn about the world, expand their sense of the world, and then that's often done kind of in tandem or it's complementary experience, and so I'm pro all kinds of media experiences of place. I think they're rich. I think they're interesting. I think they're very, very different from going somewhere.
Well, I think it's also, I mean, I love the fact that you guys are in some ways doing the setting. You're telling the story so that when people arrive there, those places are meaningful. All right, John, you had a question.
Yeah. Dylan, I love the talk. This is a great topic. I just wanted to kind of draw you out a little bit on the question of what your audiences are kind of looking for in their interaction with Atlas Obscura and the destinations. Are they looking for like stories they can share and bring back? Are they looking for risk, novelty, danger, all of the above? Authenticity, are they looking for authenticity? And how is that different from the themed entertainment versions of these types of things that we in our little field try to create?
Yeah, and I mean, I would say it's a tough question. I would say all of the above. Like from a tactical standpoint, people are both doing that kind of armchair traveling and then very much like planning their trips. We did a big tracking study, and over the course of, I think it was 7 months, there was like $2 billion in associated bookings, like not done on our platform, but like to hotels and airline. People are in the process of planning their trips when they're looking at Atlas. I think different segments of our users are looking for different things, but I will say I think everyone is looking for like a good experience. That's a very lame answer, but I guess what I mean to say is like they are sometimes looking for something that feels authentic, or at least, and authentic's a slippery word, but like something that feels like underdiscovered or maybe a little surprising, or feels like, ooh, I'm so glad I knew about that. And I was really happy that it was just like me and, a dozen other people kind of checking this out. It felt really special. I think that's like something people are looking for. And I think they want, stuff that's pretty experiential. And I think like, museums actually, it's interesting because we have a number of things in the Atlas that are specific exhibits within a museum or specific collections, because it can be a little hard to be like, here's the whole thing. And it starts to feel generic. But when you can tell a specific story about an object, it has that narrative hook that makes you go like, oh, I really want to see this. And actually, we did a podcast episode about the Fairy House in the Museum of
Colleen
Science.
Moore's Fairy Castle. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, we did a whole podcast episode about the Fairy Castle because it was exactly that kind of thing where it has like an amazing story to tell that kind of gives you narrative hook to hang on. And so we're trying to mythologize new places for people. We're trying to give them new myths, because when you travel, that's how you're making your travel decisions. You don't realize it, but you're actually like rifling through your invisible bookshelf of mythology about place. You think, Paris, I know about Paris, and I know about Las Vegas, and like, oh, somebody told me about the Museum of Science and Industry, and like, let me pull that off the shelf. And I think everyone's telling too many of the same story. I mean, I'm repeating myself here, but we're just trying to create some new sort of mythologies, and by doing that, hopefully create new pathways. And so a good story, a good experience, a sense of maybe of discovering something without being mobbed by other people, or at least having a personal moment with it, I think is important for everybody who comes to the site.
All right. Maxine had a question, which I think actually kind of dovetails a little bit with what you were just talking about. She wanted me to read it for it. There's been a lot of coverage around anime tourism, more largely content-induced tourism, i.e. like visiting Abbey Road's legendary film sets. Is this something that Atlas Obscura does at all? Would it risk amplifying over tourism? And I guess that's the idea. I mean, brand-induced tourism. That's an interesting one.
We have not really delved into what I sort of characterize as like real world fictional overlap tourism. Like, I don't know, there's a better name for this, but I think it's like I think it's going to be a continually like majorly emerging trend in tourism generally. So like there's a thing called set jetting, right? I mean, we've all heard about this for years, which is like Lord of the Rings has this giant impact on tourism to New Zealand. White Lotus, the TV show, even though it's about like people being murdered at these resorts, giant impact on tourism to Sicily and Hawaii. And this is just going to merge tighter and tighter and tighter. And especially where I think there are very deep fan communities, anime, fantasy, science fiction, subgenres of all of these things. Like, I just think you're going to get these kind of things that exist between normal group tours and LARPing-ish experiences and kind of alternative reality gaming. Like, I think it's coming. I think it's like an undeveloped path, basically, is my long and short answer to that. We currently don't offer something quite like that, but I would be interested in doing it. I have I'm a real RPG player. I'm a big D&D dungeon master, like no surprise. Nerd, check, yeah. But I want to put out a book with them of places that kind of fit the like ultimate kind of fantasy, like this place exists in D&D, here's its closest analog on Earth, and hopefully choose places that you can get to in a way that is like sustainable and not destructive. So
all right, I love it, Dylan. I'm gonna give a shout out to my friends at Morty, by the way. If you're looking for like it's an app that like allows you to find like escape rooms. It's very LARPy, but it's fun. Cool. All right, so Naf has a question. I'm gonna let this be the last question. We could sign off on this one. Naf, do you want to ask the question, or do you want me to ask for you?
No, I can go ahead. Yeah.
All right, go for it.
All right. So, my thought was that there's a lot of these factors boosting tourism, economic, environmental, yada yada. But this whole Instagrammability of things. So that was the 2010s. What would that be for this decade? And kind of following on with that is that if we're going into XR kind of media, a lot of the joy of planning travels and all that kind of goes away because you just put it on and you're in there. So how do you kind of tackle that? I don't know. They're two different questions, really.
Yeah, I think social media, short form video, the influencer creator economy, I think it's still going to be a major kind of driver, right? Like you can see in where people are getting their travel recommendations from, TikTok, Instagram, these are only going up. And it's interesting though, because sometimes it's from influencers and sometimes it's from the feed, but it's also people using those platforms to talk to their friends and family and be like, hey, I'm going to X. What is good here? It's still a very word of mouth driven thing, but I think creators feel closer to word of mouth these days than, sort of other means. So I think that is still gonna be a big piece of it. Two things that I'm really keeping my eye on and quite excited about and have to do with kind of XR or geo-based AR, which is one, like language translation is just like, we are moments away from a universal language translation browser, right? And this starts to expose communities and travel related communities to each other in really new ways. Like right now, we're an English language site. We have some international travelers. Occasionally we get people who are clearly not English language, first native speakers writing in and saying, here's a cool thing. And I love this and I use it to travel where I'm from. But I think as that happens, like it's gonna open up all kinds of crazy, interesting cross-cultural dynamics. And I don't know what it looks like, but I think from a selfish perspective, I'm like very excited to have travelers from India and Brazil and Egypt writing in about places that they just happen to know about because they're like, yeah, I grew up next to this crazy homemade castle. Like, yeah, it's there. It's awesome. Like, I hope to get those submissions as this becomes more easy, and then likewise be able to send more international travelers to more interesting places. And the second one that I'm really excited about is audio AR. I think long before we get the glasses, we've already got the earbuds in. We walk around with the earbuds in all the time. Your hands are free, your eyes are free. And with large language models in the mix, this really starts to open up the ability to do kinds of guided experiences, audio experiences that are incredibly robust. And you don't necessarily need to have like figured out every piece of content in advance, because maybe you can build content modules that are more highly editorial, but connect them with language models in some really interesting ways. So like the first thing I did with ChatGPT was I like used it to help build a walking tour of Paris. I then took that, I made a voice synth of my own voice to do that, and then I made some like artwork and music for it, and I did it all in like 20 minutes, and I was just like, it wasn't great. Like I don't know that I would want to take that exact tour. It needs some work, but I just realized like this is coming, and I'm excited about working on some of that stuff. There's a cool company, Spooler, which we work with, which is developing a basically like the RSS feed of geospatial audio. And we've worked with Niantic in the past, who obviously did Pokemon Go, but they also did an app called Field Trip that we worked with them on. That they're building a large geospatial model, an LGM, and I think that will be really interesting. I think it's going to be like a structural piece of some of this stuff that I'm talking about that's coming down the line. So I just audio first AR is a good one. Anyway, I don't know.
Dylan, I love it. This is awesome. So before we sign off here, Dylan, you're like doing so many like cool things and like you're producing so many great things. Like what are things that the community should check out? What are a few things maybe you haven't mentioned, or like how can they get down into the rabbit hole of all the cool stuff you're doing?
If you like hearing me chatter on endlessly, we have a podcast. I'm the host of most of our episodes. So we've been doing that about 3 years. And it's been a really, really fun project. So go check out the podcast. If you're into AR, VR experiences, truly, it's not coming out, I think, till the 11th, but it'll be in the like Quest, Meta, App Store. It's a great app. So I think that'll be a fun one if you have an interest in that. And we recently wrote a new book called Wildlife, all about the natural world. So go check that out. Those are some things for sure.
All right. Dylan, thanks so much for being here, man. It was really great. It's always great to talk to you. It's always great to see what you're doing. Thank you so much for everyone who joined here. Looking forward to see hopefully some of y'all next week. Dylan, again, thanks so much. If you have any parting words, take them, and then we'll cut for the day.
Yeah. Go out and explore your world. Thanks for being here. It was really fun talking to you.
So, thanks so much, guys. Thanks, everyone. Bye.